name is Sarah Peterson, and the title of my presentation is Pre-Screening Ingredients for an Assessment of Vulnerability in Food Fraud. Some of the main components of my presentation include food fraud, pre-screening, and vulnerability assessments. Food fraud mainly refers to the intentional misrepresentation or adulteration of foods, and it's mainly done for economic gain. The FDA refers to it as economically motivated adulteration. And food fraud involves selling food products that aren't up to standards in order to make a financial gain. Lastly, there are many types of food fraud, and these will be displayed on the next slide. A pre-screen is a process that makes a preliminary assessment of vulnerability for a set of ingredients. This process uses a vulnerability assessment to aid in the identification of vulnerable ingredients to help prioritize them and find which may require deeper investigation. This vulnerability assessment involves a complete evaluation of each factor that may contribute to an ingredient's vulnerability to fraud. And by characterizing the ingredient's vulnerability, this assessment helps to identify the measures that would be most effective at minimizing risks. Prioritizing ingredients for food fraud vulnerability assessments can be accomplished through 4 steps. These steps included the use of the Food Chemical Codex pre-screening guidance. Step 1 is to make a list of products most important to the company. Step 2 involves listing ingredients in the shortlisted products. Step 3 groups the ingredients by class. And finally, Step 4 is used to identify ingredients that require a full vulnerability assessment. This picture was retrieved from the Food and Drug Law Institute website based on information that was presented by Alyssa Hihon, and I thought that it illustrated the different types of food fraud very well. These types of food fraud, as shown on this illustration, include dilution or substitution, artificial enhancement, use of undeclared or unapproved banned biocides, removal of authentic constituents, misrepresentation of nutritional value, fraudulent labeling claims, formation of fraudulent products, and lastly, counterfeits and theft. Some examples of food fraud will be shared later on in this presentation. On this slide, I will further explain the steps that were mentioned earlier, which are used to prioritize ingredients using pre-screening guidance. The first 3 steps consist of gathering data, and the final step involves the actual evaluation. Step 1 is to identify all of the products that are most important to the company. Some factors that can be used to determine these products include brand equity, market share, their contribution to revenue, and the cost of their production. Step 2 involves constructing a list of ingredients that are used in the products identified in the first step. This list should also include flavors, aid used in processing, indirect additives, and sub-ingredients. Step 3 can be optional, but it does help to group together similar ingredients such as plant oils, spices, and dairy products. Finally, the 4th step is the evaluation of each group of ingredients that are identified in the prior step. The ingredients that are determined to be high priority here should then be evaluated by a vulnerability assessment. Food fraud mostly will result in the reduction of the product's quality rather than its safety. However, in some instances, food fraud has led to complications, which makes it relevant to public health. One of the most interesting instances of food fraud that I found while researching this topic occurred in 1985 and ended in 1990. In this example, Sunup Foods Incorporated sold unsweetened orange juice concentrate, which was fraudulently diluted with about 10 to 20% beet sugar. This beet sugar was used instead of cane sugar, so it was more difficult for them to detect the added amount of sugar. The processing plants involved hid the addition of beet sugar from the inspectors by using an electrical control panel to cover a secret door that led to a storage room that had tanks used to store the liquid beet sugar. This can be seen here in the photo to the left, and the photo on the right shows a hidden stainless steel piping system that was used to move the liquid beet sugar from the secret holding tanks to the processing line. Some more recent examples include instances that occurred in 2008, 2013, and 2018. In 2008, the health of many infants was compromised due to a milk powder that was later found to have been adulterated with a toxic industrial compound called melamine. This compound contains nitrogen atoms, and it is used to trick some protein test methods that calculate protein content of food based on its nitrogen content. In 2013, a Food Safety Authority of Ireland released a survey that identified horse and pig DNA in beef burger products, which suggested a meat substitution scandal involving most of Europe. Out of 27 analyzed beef burger products, 10 tested positive for horse DNA, and 23 tested positive for pig DNA. Lastly, in 2018, a group of about 5 individuals adulterated black pepper in Vietnam, and they were aware of the adulterations and the toxicity. In this last example, the weight of the pepper was fraudulently increased by adding home-dyed gravel and coffee bean skins to the product. The dye was made by breaking open batteries and using their black-colored manganese dioxide powder. In the laboratory tests that were done regarding this food fraud, it was found that the toxic adulterants made up more than 18% of the black pepper. Food fraud overall is an ongoing problem, and these are only a handful of the examples that have occurred. The FSMA-PC final rule and GFSI are the most impactful and direct food fraud-related compliance requirements, and they help to minimize and prevent food fraud. The FSMA-PC final rule, also known as the Food Safety Modernization Act Preventative Controls, became final in 2015. And it enforces good manufacturing practice, hazard analysis, and risk-based preventative controls regarding food. It specifically requires a vulnerability assessment or a risk assessment of economically motivated actions that could lead to health hazards. It also requires subsequent prevention plans where warranted. Overall, the FSMA-PC final rule requires that food facilities have a food safety plan, which includes analysis of hazards and risk-based preventative controls, which are meant to help minimize or even prevent hazards that are identified. GFSI, also known as the Global Food Safety Initiative, worked towards creating requirements that covered regulations and standards enforced by different countries and companies. These key GFSI requirements regarding food fraud included both food fraud vulnerability assessment and a food fraud mitigation plan. In short, its goal is to mainly improve management systems in food safety and ensure that there is confidence in the delivery of safe food to customers worldwide. To relate this topic to our current circumstances, COVID-19 can also have an influence on food fraud. Right now, most parts of the world are experiencing extreme downturns in the economy due to the pandemic. According to food fraud advisors, its impact on the economy is very likely causing a spike in the motivation to commit food fraud in order to directly increase profits. Shortages in supply have also led to extra pressure on supply chains to deliver substantial amounts of product to the consumer to meet their demands. This may lead to the increase of food fraud in order to keep customers happy by providing goods that may not be readily available due to the influence of the pandemic. In order to accomplish this, companies may take shortcuts and might even become less strict and experience a reduction in oversight in order to keep up with customer product demands and their changes in buying patterns. In conclusion, food fraud presents a danger to the public health, and it needs to be prevented through enforced strategies and regulations. In order to prevent food fraud, relationships between the consumer and supplier have to be improved, and we have to invest in new science and technologies to reduce the risk of food fraud. By taking a proactive approach to eliminate opportunities and motivations for food fraud while enforcing control measures, we can avoid the vulnerability of food fraud, since opportunities and motivations of companies without preventative control measures may lead to increased food fraud vulnerability. Overall, reducing food fraud by prioritizing the pre-screening of ingredients for food fraud vulnerability assessments through the 4 steps mentioned in this presentation, we can help keep public health out of danger and improve food safety by minimizing and preventing food fraud. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my presentation, and here's a list of the resources that I use to improve my knowledge on this topic. Overall, I hope that you were able to learn something new about food fraud and how it impacts our food safety.